time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, by George, I think he's got it. Now, here's George.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on into another podcast by George. I'm looking at that graphic and listening to that music at the same time that you are, and it looks to me like I'm wearing the same shirt in that graphic that I'm wearing right now. So, and by the way, I want to thank Gene Peterson. He does a lot of the graphics and stuff for the show. I mean, it takes a lot of help to put this thing together. John Schaefer, you just heard his voice. He's a big booming announcer in the Des Moines area. He's a content creator. You can locate him online. He was good enough to do that, and I'm appreciative of all the help that I can get. And speaking of help, we're going to get some today. We're going to get some advice. We got our good buddy, our good friend coming back on the podcast by George, LiveLine. Let me put his graphic up on the screen. And folks, it's Dr. Andrew Nish. He spent 3 decades as an interventional radiologist. His passion is to educate the public and healthcare workers about true health and well-being and how this can be achieved through lifestyle changes, including food and nutrition, stress management, sleep, exercise, purpose in life, and social relationships. He's especially fascinated. He gives talks all the time on the mind-body connection. You get a chance to go see him in person to talk about the mind-body connection. Do it. And it's all about how our thoughts and beliefs directly influence our physical and mental health. And folks, we are full of thoughts and beliefs these days, and a lot of them aren't very good. And some of that could be reflected in this life expectancy information that we're going to be talking about here very shortly. The doc is really attuned to that, and we're going to be talking about that very shortly. But first of all, I'm going to do some housekeeping here very quickly because people tune in and they know this is going to be medical stuff, and I can't hardly get to the doc without going through some of the most recent information. This is out of the Des Moines Register. Iowa's COVID-19 cases decrease as hospitalizations increase slightly over the week. So COVID's still out there. Let me read through this. Newly reported COVID cases in Iowa dropped to their lowest point in 2 months, but hospitalizations rose, albeit slightly, the third consecutive week, according to data released Wednesday by the Iowa Department of Public Health and U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The state health department reported 4,176 new COVID-19 cases this week, or about 597 per day. That's the fewest new cases reported in a single week since the first week of July. That's not good. The actual number of new cases is likely higher since those positive at home tests often are not reported to the state health department. Now, the decline that I talked about could be short-lived based on the amount of virus concentrated in the Des Moines metro area's wastewater. This is becoming more significant, this measurement device they have in the wastewater, historically an indicator of increases and decreases in new case counts. It's going up. According to the most recent data available from the Des Moines Metropolitan Wastewater Authority, as of August 31st, the effective virus concentration in the city's sewage had more than doubled week over week, reaching its highest point since early 2022. Now, that's really not good. The number of people hospitalized in Iowa with COVID-19 increased slightly for the third consecutive week, up to 270 patients, according to the Federal Health and Human Services Department. Of those, 25 required intensive care for COVID-19 complications. The state health department reported 28 additional COVID-19 deaths this week. So, folks, people are still dying of this. I mean, that Omicron virus may be, less lethal and less likely to result in hospitalizations, but all indications are that people are still getting COVID. It may be increasing according to that wastewater information, and we should be aware and not let down our guard when it comes to, vaccinations and wearing masks and that type of thing. And speaking of all of that, I wanted to bring this up too, because this is something that people are talking about, and it is that COVID vaccines can be like the flu shot. With Omicron-specific boosters hitting pharmacy shelves this week, health officials say the country's COVID-19 vaccination campaign has officially entered a new phase. Barring any new variant curveballs. And bear in mind that that's what COVID does. I mean, that's what viruses do, barring any of those new variants. But it would seem to me we're going to get some. White House COVID-19 coordinator, Dr. Ashish, that's hard for me to read there, said the latest vaccine rollout may be the first of what will become an annual shot for Americans, like the flu shot. So be prepared for that. Okay, so we're about through with the housekeeping here. Let me get this. Oh yeah, I get asked about this once in a while. Okay, so monkeypox cases. People talk about monkeypox a lot. The cases are dropping, but racial disparities are growing. So what this article from the Associated Press talks about very briefly. I'm not going to read through this, but monkeypox appears to be on the decline. Perhaps it's under control. It does appear to be affecting disproportionately certain demographics of the population, and particularly, again, with all illnesses. One thing that this talks about is it's just not, the people that have been having the sexual activity that is often blamed on monkeypox, but also, the poor people in our society are adversely affected because of their access to medical care. Okay, I don't want to spend a lot of time on monkeypox. So let me, because that's not what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about what Dr. Nish is best known for, what he's the authority on. And of course, it is cancer treatments, and something that he talks about all the time in his presentations, which is life expectancy and how this is being dictated a lot by the mind body connection. So let's jump into this. Let's bring him back into the podcast by George LiveLine and say good morning to Dr. Nish. Hi, Doc.
Morning, George. What I want to know is if you washed that shirt since you made your little introduction.
On video, I wouldn't have to. I mean, this thing could smell to the high heavens. I mean, I've got several of these things. As a matter of fact, it's kind of how I keep a fresh look to the show, and it's how I tell which show is which, because I'm wearing a different color shirt. I got green ones and red ones and white ones, but this is the one that I had the logo taken out. Okay, let's get into this because Doc's time is limited, obviously. Now, again, I want to encourage people that are just now starting to tune in. If you got questions or comments, go ahead and pose those, and I will get to them. But this is something that I wanted to have Dr. Nish talk about right away, because this is in the headlines now. And to me, this was kind of almost like old news, Doc. It says Biden to channel Kennedy in his push for a cancer moonshot. I thought, well, wait a minute. I've heard about a cancer moonshot before. Dateline Washington, this is out of the Associated Press. President Joe Biden next week will highlight his plans for drastically reducing cancer deaths and boosting treatments for a disease in what he has called the generation's moonshot, the White House announced Wednesday. So that announcement was this week. He's going to talk about it next week. And Biden's speech at the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum in Boston on Monday will come on the 60th anniversary of his predecessor's speech outlining his vision for putting the first man on the moon. The White House said Biden will outline what his administration is doing to end cancer as we know it. The issue is personal for Biden, whose son, Beau Biden, died in 2015 of brain cancer. Biden launched the cancer moonshot the following year when serving as Barack Obama's vice president. I almost wish they hadn't brought that up. I guess it is factual and true, but I hate the politics of me. I hope Biden's doing this not just because his son got cancer, but for the better good of everyone. In February, Biden, a Democrat, set more ambitious goals for the project, including cutting the rate of cancer deaths in half in the coming 25 years and improving treatments and quality of life for those with cancer and their caregivers. So take that down off screen and bring the doc back in here. So, Doc, that moonshot, that article points it out, that's been around for a while. What do you make of that? Is this more money, or are you privy to what this is all about?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've read some stuff about it. Again, it's throwing money at a problem that's actually, in many cases, preventable. It's what we do in healthcare, right? So we don't prevent disease, we treat disease. And when you look at cancer, so right now in our country, we still have about 20% of cancers are tobacco related, even though our smoking rate and tobacco use rate has gone down. About 20% of cancers or so are tobacco related. It's estimated that 30 or even more percent are related to metabolic health, being overweight, being metabolically dysregulated. So if we got rid of tobacco and everybody was metabolically normal, we can cut the cancer rate in half without spending a dime.
Wow.
So I just, this is industry driven. Cancer care is expensive. Drugs are expensive. Pharmaceuticals are making lots of money. And we're still not putting enough money into prevention. And if you really want to cut the cancer rate significantly, then we have got to change how we do life in this country, meaning we have got to look at the social determinants of health. We have to look at why are people getting sick? Poor diet, unstable housing, poor education, unstable financial situations, unstable and dangerous neighborhoods. These are all evoking physiologic, responses in our body that are promoting chronic diseases such as cancer. And until we change those, it's, you can throw all the money at it you want, but the cure is in prevention. And I just, we're going to spend billions upon billions upon billions of dollars. And as Albert Einstein says, what's the, what am I thinking of here? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Well, that's exactly what we're doing. And we're not going to cure cancer because cancer is not one disease. Cancer is hundreds, if not thousands of different diseases. So I have a real problem with it because, again, we're just throwing money at the back end of this and not really solving the deep rooted societal problems that we need to solve. And the reason we're not, it's too hard. People don't want to tackle that. It's real easy to say, oh, we've discovered another molecular pathway and we're going to build a drug to stop it. And we're going to, improve this cancer outcome. That's pretty easy in the scheme of things. When you talk about combating 400 years of societal problem, that's a whole nother level of complexity and political mumbo jumbo.
Yeah.
But that's where the money is. That's where the results are.
So several things I always wonder about, and a couple of them you brought up there. One of them is cancer is not a thing. I mean, I saw a PBS special on that kind of drove that home. Okay, so cancer to a layman, to a dummy like me, seems to be a disease that differs, but the one thing it has in common with all of its different variants, if you want to look at it that way, is that it metastasizes. It can spread throughout the body. That's kind of what cancer is. Is there anything like on a molecular or an essence basis that makes cancers alike, or are they all completely different? And that's why we're not going to cure cancer because it's not a thing.
So cancer is basically defined by uncontrolled cell growth. Cells no longer respond to normal growth inhibitors that we have in our body. Cancers, we've traditionally defined cancer by organ of origin, right? You have colon cancer, you have breast cancer, you have prostate cancer. And we're going to define that differently. We're going to define it by its molecular markers. So what are those, markers on cells that define how that cancer behaves? So right now, we use drugs to treat multiple different kinds of cancer, not necessarily based on their organ of origin, but based on their molecular profile. And so we're changing how we're defining cancer, and we're changing how we're defining cancer treatment. But we still use, methods that have been used for decades, including surgery and radiation and chemotherapy. But now we have more targeted therapies, what we call small molecule therapies, immune modulating therapies. So we have a lot more weapons in our armamentarium, but still, these are not curing cancer. These are improving patients' life and life expectancy, but not many of these treatments actually cure the cancer. So, in my world and in my mind, the best cure is prevention. So, what can you do from a lifestyle perspective that will minimize your risk of cancer? And so, number one on that list is never use a tobacco product.
No, yeah.
Number two on that list is we want people to be, and I'm going to use the term metabolically normal, meaning they have a normal response to insulin, they have a normal response to all of these hormones that are involved in our metabolic health and our energy production. Those two things, if people were normal, what we call quote normal, we could see a reduction in cancer by up to 50%.
Wow.
And we haven't spent billions of dollars developing drugs. What we need to do, though, is we need to spend billions of dollars helping people buy real, clean food, helping people. I mean, look at Jackson, Mississippi. They can't even provide their population with water.
Exactly.
I mean, we're an economically developed, highly evolved society, and we can't provide people with clean water. I mean,
Yes.
I'm not sure we're much better than third world countries in some aspects. If you look at, well, we can talk about our longevity thing, but
Yeah.
compared with other countries, we're losing life expectancy when other countries are actually gaining life
I
expectancy.
saw that. Yeah.
And this is not surprising. Our policies are geared towards treating disease. Our policies are not geared towards preventing disease. And in order to prevent disease, we have to be able to supply our population with clean, whole food, clean water, get rid of the environmental toxicants that are in our environment, such as glyphosate, such as nitrates in our water. And I'm just scratching the surface on these. We need to be able to give people places, secure housing in safe environments. If you're housing insecure and you live in an area that is prone to crime, you're living constantly in a fight or flight situation. That's disease promoting. We have to better bring people together in love and kindness and not this hatred that's been so propagated over the last 4 years. So those are all things that are going to prevent disease. The drugs and chemicals we give people aren't preventing disease. They're not curing disease. They're maybe at best extending life expectancy.
Yeah, folks, the subtitle to my show, one of the subtitles anyway, is Release the Truth Tellers. And Dr. Nish is a truth teller when it comes to the medical profession, because there are people, particularly in the pharmaceutical industry, that would not tell you what he's just saying. They would say, we need to spend money, we need to invent, we need to create a drug that's going to cure cancer. And the other thing, when I look at that article and I look at Joe Biden, now I'm very political. The doc isn't. Doc, you don't have to go political on me here, but I look at that and I think, Joe, the one thing that you could also do is to improve access to the medical system. Now, maybe it's Medicare for all, maybe it's a single payer system, maybe it's something better than we have, but you talked about how we can cure half of cancers. How about if we had more people able and willing maybe to take care of, to take advantage of the medical system that we have currently? Would that be a part of that 50%, or would that be on top of that 50%?
That'd be on top of that 50%. The 50% is lifestyle changes that will work to minimize your risk. Access to health. And again, that's sort of in a simplistic world, a solution. Oh, they need better access to care. Well, that can result in some improvement, but not probably as dramatically as you think. We have to deal with the issue of racism in this country. So we have 400 years of telling African American people they're inferior to white people. And you know what? That in and of itself results in poorer health. So even independent of poverty, being Black results in poorer health just because you're Black, because of the 400-year history of what's gone on in this country. And there are studies that really show that quite dramatically.
All right, so that's the moonshot portion of this that I wanted to get into. I also created that graphic for the show. So, they're making an effort here, but they need to look at it maybe through a slightly different prism, the prism that the doc shares with this mind-body connection all the time. We talked
Well,
about
the lens they're looking through it is the lens of industry.
Yes.
And
Corporatism.
that's what drives our political
Yes.
environment. That's what drives policy. It's all about industry. It's all about economics. It's all about profits. And that, that is not making us better. I mean, and we're going to talk about lifespan here in a minute. I'm going to talk about some statistics when we look at our lifespan, but go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, I got a couple of other things that I wanted to spin through here very quickly. Now, one of them is before we even get to the lifespan thing, this is a local story, but it's something that Doc has knowledge of. And I wanted to talk about right off the top here. This is some local reporting. This is from the KCCI website. And one of the most common forms of cancer, of course, in men is prostate cancer. Iowa man with advanced prostate cancer finds hope in new treatment at Des Moines Hospital. So there is the fellow. Let me bring this up full screen. I'll read through this very quickly. The last hope for a man with advanced prostate cancer lies in the form of a clinical trial first offered in the state at the Unity Point Health John Stoddard Cancer Center in Des Moines. No matter the situation, David Clark, and no relation, folks, is rarely without a smile or an accompanying joke. His happy-go-lucky outlook on life, however, is a far cry from the moment in 2019 when he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. I thought, I'm going to die, David said. He wasn't alone in that thought. Quote, I was devastated, said Carol Clark, David's wife. He had complained for a year and a half that he wasn't feeling well. He was in pain and he'd been going to doctor after doctor. Carol said she demanded tests from his doctor in the Lamoni area, and folks around the country, around the world. Lamoni is down on the southern border of Iowa. It led to a grim diagnosis. They told him to just basically go home, Carol said. You got about 3 months left. However, they had a good friend who helped them by connecting them to a doctor and then to the Decatur County Hospital. They got a bunch of great people on staff, David said. For years, that's where David had received several treatments, different treatments. However, his cancer still progressed. I remember asking the doctors where I didn't have cancer, and they said my hands and feet and everything else had cancer, David said. Now, we'd run through everything, and there was nothing left to try, Carol said, until suddenly there was something else to try. In the spring of 2022, the Food and Drug Administration authorized, what is that, Doc?
Pluvicto.
Yeah, Pluvicto, an infusion treatment, delivering radiation to targeted cells in the body, causing the cells to die. David is one of 2 patients at John Stoddard Cancer Center undergoing the trial with physicians overseeing. This really is kind of the last resort, said Dr. Arshin Shabani. Am I pronouncing that right, Doc?
Shabani.
Yeah, Shabani, a physician at John Stoddard Cancer Center. Shabani says people who qualify include patients whose prostate cancer is spreading to other parts of the body, and they've gone through all the drugs and treatments. Our goal is to help control the disease and then continue to their other therapies, Shabani said. Okay, so this is the end of it, but I'm going to just skip ahead here. I want to get to this highlighted part because this kind of jumped out at me, and this made me think of you, Doc, with this mind-body connection, because they're kind of talking about it down here. Quote, you have to get fearless, because when you get fearless, then you can start functioning again and trying to get that help that you need, both from outside and from within, I would argue. And I know you would agree with that too, Doc. Take it from there.
That's a great intuitive statement by that.
Yeah.
Woman. Because, we know that if you, and we talked about this, when you're given a diagnosis of cancer, the first thing you think of is, I'm going to die. Well, most people actually don't die from their cancer. We can keep people alive and doing quite well with many, many cancers. But the real thing is, until you get over the fear of dying, it's hard to live life. Once you are over that fear of dying, then you can go ahead and live life again. And that's been said many, many times by many people who have had cancer. It's part of philosophy. It's part of tradition. So we really do have to move beyond fear. And in order to move beyond fear, we have to get over the fear of death. And that once we do that, we can begin to live again. So I want to put this treatment in context. And what this treatment is it's a molecule where we've attached a radioactive substance to it called lutetium-177. And that molecule specifically binds to a protein on the surface of the cancer cell called PMSA, PSMA, protein-specific membrane antigen, or prostate-specific membrane antigen, sorry. And it specifically binds to those cancer cells, and therefore we can deliver radiation, high doses of radiation through that to the cancer cell and kill the cells. Now, this is not a curative treatment, okay? This is not going to cure anybody from their cancer. It's designed to stabilize the cancer and improve their overall life expectancy. So when you look at what we call phase 3 clinical trial, it actually improved life expectancy over standard treatment by about 4 months. So I want to put that in the context. This is not a cure. This is something that we believe can help improve life expectancy. And we'll be learning more as this comes. This was only approved by the FDA in May of this year. So it's a very, very new treatment. And it can only be used in prostate cancers that actually display this receptor on their cells. So this is prostate-specific membrane antigen. We have a test for that, whether that does display that. So that's sort of the context of this, and I just want people to be aware that it's new, it is exciting, it's not a cure, it can improve overall life expectancy by a small amount.
So for all those diagnosed with prostate cancer, you can't go down, run down there and just ask for this. You have to be screened for it. There has to be some reason to believe that it's going to work. And then if I understand correctly, reading that article, it has to be like the last step in the regimen that you would normally get.
You have to fail our standard treatments. So,
I see.
Standard treatments are, we give you things to block testosterone so you don't produce testosterone, because prostate cancer is testosterone sensitive. There's some chemotherapy that we use. You have not to respond to that. So this is a very small number of people. This is not, so prostate cancer is the number one cancer diagnosis in men. It's not the number one cause of death. Lung cancer is. And most men will do, prostate cancer tends to be typically very slow growing. It's curable with surgery and or radiation in many, many cases. And so this is a very small percentage of the prostate cancer population.
Okay, good. We're just about there, folks. We're going to come up on this life expectancy issue. It's jaw-dropping, this information that was just released. Before we do that, I want to get to this very quickly, because this is near and dear to my heart when you talk about these drugs. The FDA panel is backing a much-debated ALS drug in a rare second review. And of course, I see these. I mean, I've watched this pretty closely, because as folks know that follow my podcast, my sister died at 49, almost 50 years of age from ALS. A panel of federal health advisors voted Wednesday to recommend approval for an experimental drug to treat Lou Gehrig's disease, a remarkable turnaround for the much-debated medication that was previously rejected by the same group earlier this year. The Food and Drug Administration advisors voted 7-2. The data from Amylyx Pharma warranted approval, despite hours of debate about the strength and reliability of the company's lone study. The FDA is not required to follow the group's advice, but its positive recommendation suggests an approval is likely later this month. ALS patients and their families have rallied behind Amylyx's drug, launching an aggressive lobbying campaign and enlisting members of Congress to push the FDA approval. Despite a negative review published by FDA's internal scientists ahead of the meeting, a majority of the outside panelists said Amylyx had presented enough evidence to suggest the drug is helping patients live longer. The same group of neurology experts narrowly voted against the drug in March due to concerns about missing data and other issues in the study. Amylyx's medication comes as a powder that combines two older drugs, one prescription medication for liver disorders, and then a dietary supplement used in traditional Chinese medicine. Hanging over the review is FDA's controversial approval of the Alzheimer's drug Aduhelm, I think that is, last year, Aduhelm, which reviewed by the same agency, scientists and outside advisors. In that case, the FDA disregarded the overwhelmingly negative vote by its outside advisors, 3 of whom resigned over the decision. The agency's approval, which followed irregular meetings with drug maker Biogen, is under investigation by Congress and federal investigators. Okay, so this talks about the problem with that particular drug. Again, I pull these things and I think I'm going to get to them, but I weary of talking about them when I have the doc on talking about these other things. But doc, this does trans into your world a little bit because with ALS now, these people are going to die. There's no cure for this. I mean, it's game over. You get diagnosed. There's very little even to mitigate it. None of the mitigation efforts worked with my sister hardly. So people are pushing for these drugs. Like, what the hell? What can it hurt? Why not give it to them? Let's try it. You must hear some of that in the cancer world too. Where do you come down on that? How do you feel about this approval process? And is it being handled properly in your mind?
So the approval process is fraught with problems. There's too much interaction between the FDA and these drug companies as far as, not nefarious really, but they're too comfy with each other. I mean, the FDA's purpose is to approve drugs that work and protect the American society from their side effects. And I don't think we do a good job of that. So I think there's many, many problems with that. There's also many, many problems with the research. So this research for approval was supported by the drug company. Well, that's a conflict of interest and a bias in and of itself. And so if you have this close a vote and you have this much argument, my guess is this drug is probably not very effective. And I haven't studied it and I can't really comment on it. So,
yeah.
But I think that, we want to have trust in the FDA, yet there's multiple problems with the FDA and its relationship with pharmaceutical companies.
What about approval of drugs at the end of life, which the ALS diagnosis basically is? A lot of in this article too, they're very careful about giving it to somebody if it's going to have some kind of side effects. Well, the side effect for these people is death. So people will look at it and say, who cares? I mean, go ahead and give it to them. Do we still have to be sensitive about quality of life and side effect issues with somebody that's looking at dying very soon because of a terminal diagnosis?
Yeah, obviously we need to be better as a society talking about our end of life. We die very poorly in this country because we're so fearful of death. And whether that fear is born out of religious belief, whether that fear is born out of not thinking there's anything else beyond this life, that's each individual's perspective. But we just don't have good conversations about death. We don't have good conversations about what do you want at the end? How do you want the end of your life to look? And so we try and do everything possible to extend that life. And many times, most of the time, it's futile. Most of the time, it's probably not improving someone's quality of life. So I just think we have to have better open discussions about how people want to die. And because death is inevitable, we're all going to die, right? And none of us want to die, but we are going to die. And so we have to have better discussion about that. And we have to be open to one another about that.
Well, and we talk about it often on my podcast, and the doctor's good enough to come on and discuss this with us. And this is an excellent transition, actually, to this topic that I've been wanting to get you to. This is the main reason that he's coming on, and it has to do with this life expectancy thing. And Doc, when I think of you, I oftentimes think of this. I remember one of the first discussions that you and I had. I made the misstep of saying, well, we're living longer than we used to. And you said, whoa, wait a minute. Not necessarily so. This was a few years ago, and now it really appears like it's not true. Yeah. This is from the Associated Press. Most of the articles that I'm pulling today are from AP. U.S. life expectancy plunged again in 2021, down nearly a year. Yeah. And that's on aggregate. That's on average. That's for all of us. Might be less, might be more. This says we're living a year less than you might have been planning on. U.S. life expectancy dropped for the second consecutive year in 2021, falling to nearly a year, falling a year from 2020, according to the government report that was released this week. In the first 2 years of the COVID-19 pandemic, the estimated American lifespan has shortened by nearly 3 years. The last comparable decrease happened in the early 1940s during the height of World War II. So, okay, you know why there, the war, you have COVID. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention officials blame COVID-19 for about half the decline in 2021, a year when vaccinations became widely available, but new coronavirus variants caused waves of hospitalization and deaths, as well as unvaccination. Other contributing factors to the decline are long-standing problems: drug overdoses, heart disease, suicide, and chronic liver disease. It's a dismal situation. It was bad before, and it's gotten worse, said Samuel Preston, the University of Pennsylvania demographer. Okay, because there's a part of this I want to get to with the doc right off the top. It says it was 78 years, 10 months in 2019. In 2020, it dropped to 77 years. Last year, it fell to about 76 years, 1 month. The last time it was that low was in 1996. Now, declines during the pandemic were worse for some racial groups, and some gaps widened. For example, life expectancy for American Indian and Alaskan Native people saw a decline of more than 6.5 years since the pandemic began, and is at 65 years. In the same span, life expectancy for Asian Americans dropped by about 2 years and stands at 83.5. And this article goes on, but it just kind of sweeps by that. I'm like, wait a minute. I think you've talked about this before. Asian Americans are going to live to be 83.5 years old, and the American Indian and Alaskan Native people dropped 6.5 years since the pandemic to 65 years. Okay, Doc, how much of this is the treatment? How much of it is access to medical care? How much of it is COVID related? What is this all about?
Oh, this has multiple layers.
Yeah.
But you can look at this. Let's look at, so in 2020, African Americans lost 3 years of their life expectancy. Hispanic Americans lost 4 years of their life expectancy. Not as bad in 2021. The Native American thing is actually shocking.
Yeah.
So Native Americans right now, if you're born as a Native American, mostly on a reservation, you can expect to live to 65. So you have to go back to the 1940s, and that was the average life expectancy for the average American. So these people have a life expectancy that we saw on average back in the 1940s. Why is that? There are multiple layers to this. Not the least of which is, number one, in my mind, and we talk to the psychologists about this. These are people who are living on reservations.
Yes.
And it's just like the African Americans. They have been told by our European white Anglo-Saxon ancestors and our current population that they are inferior people.
Yes.
And that's where they need to live. And this is being carried in their psyche and in their bodies, generation after generation after generation. That's one huge aspect that we don't want to talk about, but it's true. They're holding this in themselves because of generations of abuse, generations of impoverishment, generations of being told that they're savages and they're inferior. And this is affecting populations now for things that happened hundreds of years ago.
And they're confined, kind of. They're restricted.
And they are on these reservations. These reservations are not Shangri-La. They typically are incredibly impoverished. They have no natural resources. And these young Indian, Native American children and adults have no real purpose in life. They just don't have a purpose. And so what do? They drink. They're exposed to crappy food because we give them crappy food. We give them the leftovers. And it is a multi-generational, multifaceted problem. And it's shocking that I think as white European descendants, we should be utterly embarrassed at how we've treated these people.
Shame. Honest to God.
It's shameful.
Yes,
and so our answer is, well, build some casinos and make some money. It ain't about money here, George. It's about being treated as an equal with respect, just like you are a white person. And that's one of the trauma of what's gone on over 100 years is an incredibly important part of why that population and the African American population do so poorly? And we can say, oh, well, they don't have good access to healthcare. Well, let me tell you about an experiment that was done in California by Kaiser. So Kaiser Permanente looked at their maternal mortality rate in women and found it was accelerating. So we're the only country in the industrialized world whose maternal and fetal mortality or neonatal mortality is actually increasing. So they looked at it and said, we're going to do everything we can for women in distress. Whether you're Black or white, you're going to get treated exactly the same. And they did. And what they found is the maternal mortality dropped 50% for white women. It barely changed for Black women, yet they were getting the same treatment. Those Black women are carrying hundreds of years of generational discrimination in their bodies, and they just don't do as well. So, people want to attribute, well, the Black people or these other ethnic people don't do as well because they're impoverished. It's more than impoverishment. It's a deep-seated sense of being inferior that we've created in our society.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. That's the mind body. And this article comes up to this a little bit here. I'll see if it comes up here in what I read on. Experts say there are many possible reasons for such differences, including lack of access to quality health care, lower vaccination rates, and a greater share of the population in lower paying jobs that required them to keep working when the pandemic was at its worst. And this has to go to that economic status thing that the doc was talking about. And what's the number one reason that people continue to work in those circumstances? It isn't for the minimal pay that they get a lot of times. It's so that they can have health care. That's why they were out there working. And that's the ultimate sad irony of this. Their quality of life is not very good, and their lifespan is declining disproportionately. The new report is based on provisional data. Life expectancy estimates can change with the addition of more data and further analysis. For example, the CDC initially said life expectancy in 2020 declined by about 1 year, 6 months, but after more death reports and analysis came in, it ended up being about 1 year, 10 months. You think, oh, okay, that's just 4 months. Yeah, well, if that 4 months is your life, folks, that's a big deal. Now, white people saw the second biggest drop among racial and ethnic groups, with life expectancy falling over 1 year to about 76 years, 5 months. Black Americans had the third largest decline, falling more than 8 months to 70 years, 10 months. Now, I found this to be interesting. Doc, maybe you know something about this. I had never heard this before. Hispanic Americans had seen a huge drop in life expectancy in 2020, 4 years. But in 2021, life expectancy for them dropped by about 2 months to about 77 years, 7 months. Preston thinks, the guy quoted in this, thinks good vaccination rates among Hispanics played a role. I was unaware of that. Hispanics in COVID had a good rate of vaccination. Number one, I was not aware of that, and number two, is that accurate? And what's the reason for it?
So I don't know that statistic of what the percentage of Hispanics have been vaccinated. I'm taking it at face value that may be true. I think that Hispanic people tend to have really good community. They live together and they are influential with one another. So that doesn't surprise me, actually.
Interesting. Okay, so let's go back to this now. We'll get it wrapped up here because we're running out of time with the doc, and it always comes upon us quicker than we think. So that is the last slide there that I saw. Let's see. The report also suggests gains against suicide are being undone. So gains against suicide are being undone. U.S. suicides rose from the early 2000s until 2018, but then they fell a little in 2019 and then more in 2020, the first year of the pandemic. Oh, wait a second. Suicides dropped during the first year of the pandemic. Experts had wondered if that may have been related to a phenomenon seen in the early stages of wars and national disasters in which people band together and support each other. Okay, I look at that again. I'm thinking Dr. Nish, I'm thinking mind-body connection here. And he just talked about the community, the Hispanic community. And look at that. I mean, that jumps out at me, Doc. I mean, that's got to be about the only explanation for that. That's, again, part of this jaw-dropping report, I think.
Yeah, think of the beginning of the pandemic when we were all, we were trying to support our healthcare workers. We were trying to support one another. And then it drags on and it drags on, and we get more and more isolated because of shutdowns and lockdowns. And we know that isolation and loneliness is deadly. I mean, we lose anywhere from 9 to 12 years if you have a subjective or objective, you're lonely and isolated. So that's not surprising at all. The other thing that this article didn't talk about that I'm going to talk about, and this doesn't result in lots and lots of deaths, but let's talk a little bit about deaths by firearms, because this is really disturbing to me.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not, massive amounts of deaths, but in 2020, we killed over 45,000 people with firearms in this country. 45,000 people. If you look at the 2020 data, guess what the number one cause of death in children ages 1 to 19 is?
Firearms.
Firearms.
Yeah.
It's disgraceful.
Yes.
It's disgraceful. And now, some of that is a little bit of statistical manipulation in that it used to be motor vehicle accidents. Well, our motor vehicles have gotten safer, right? We have airbags, we have really good car seats. And so motor vehicle deaths have gone down. And they have now been surpassed by firearm deaths in children ages 1 through 19. It goes back to policy. So I don't know if you're aware of this. In 1996, there was a representative from Arkansas by the name of Jay Dickey. And Jay Dickey put an amendment into a bill that prevented the CDC from spending any money to advocate for gun control. So that is written into our legal system. It's called the Dickey Amendment. The CDC kind of basically shut down any statistical analysis of firearm deaths. They certainly didn't promote, gun control or anything like that. That's changing a little bit now. But again, this is built into our legal system, and it is absolutely unconscionable that over 4,000 kids die per year of gunshot wounds. Now, some of them are self-inflicted. Suicide accounts for about 30%. Some of them are accidental, but many of them aren't. If you look at the 29 most wealthy countries in the world, the U.S. accounts for 97% of firearm deaths in kids 1 to 4 and 92% in kids 5 to 14. So we are the gun capital of the world.
Oh, yeah.
Par excellence.
Oh, yeah.
And we are killing all kinds of people. Now, the other thing I want to highlight is also not only the suicide rate, but the drug overdose rate. So for the first time in our history in 2021, over 100,000 or 20, the statistics were the data was from April of 2020 to April of 2021. Over 100,000 people died of drug overdoses. 100,000 people. That was up 28% from the same period the year before. A lot of that, and the majority of that was fentanyl, all fentanyl that's on the street.
Yeah.
So what is that saying about our society, George? It is saying our society is in distress. People are killing themselves. People are overdosing. If people have stable economic, housing, education, community support, they're not having to resort to these things. But we have such distress in our society because of our economic inequality, our discriminatory policies, our discriminatory attitude, that more and more people are turning to drugs, alcohol. The alcohol use rate during the pandemic actually skyrocketed. And we're seeing more and more suicides. We're seeing more gun use. And this is not coincidental. This is all because of what's going on in society. So our society is distressed. Our agriculture system is distressed. Our planet is distressed. And our planet is showing us that by all of these natural disasters that are happening. We have more fires. We have more floods. We have higher sea levels. These are not coincidental. These are all connected. And, it's very distressing that we just keep talking about, well, let's fix the disease. Well, no, let's fix the root cause of the problem. So, you look at why are deaths increasing? Sure, COVID had an impact. There's no question about that. But that's the tip of the iceberg. We see more chronic diseases. We're seeing more heart disease. Well, gosh, if statins were so good, why are we seeing more heart disease? It ain't about just cholesterol. It's about the distress in our society. Why are we seeing more cancer? So year over year, we're seeing more cancer. Now, you wouldn't know it by listening to the news. We're seeing more cancer deaths year over year. The rate of death is less. But for example, I just wrote these statistics down this morning. In 2017, there were almost 1.68 million cancer cases. Predicted this year, almost 1.9 million cancer cases. So we're seeing more and more disease. And use the word disease, we use it as a singular word, but let's break it up into dis, ease. We're not at ease with ourselves. We're not at ease with our planet. We're not at ease in society. And this is leading to physical disease. So these are not all coincidental. These are, the COVID pandemic actually accentuated and highlighted these disparities that have been there for generations. And the cure doesn't come from moonshots. The cure doesn't come from pharmaceuticals. The cure comes from how we think about our society, how we think and care or not care for one another. And, we treat the rhetoric and discourse out of Washington as, oh, it's just rhetoric and discourse. No, it's harmful. It is actually harming our population. It's hearing the hatred of one group for another. Yes, I don't like right-wing Republicans, but I'm not going to hate those people.
Excellent point.
And so we have to separate. We can't be hateful of people because of their skin color, because of their political bent, because of their sexual orientation. But we've developed this system of hatred in this country based on these different things. Oh, you're Republican, I hate you. No, I don't agree with you, but I don't have any reason to hate you. And so we don't show care for one another. We don't show compassion for one another. We relegate people of different color or people of different sexual orientation to being inferior to us, or for some reason they need to be fixed. No, they don't need to be fixed. They need to be loved and cared for. And so until we can change how we societally think about one another and about the earth and the globe, there's no amount of money, there's no drugs that are going to fix these problems.
My God, is that well said? Like I said, he's a truth teller, folks. I mean, you can't encapsulate this any better. I mean, Doc, I think of what Joe Biden said last week with that address that's being so pillared compared to what you just talked about. And honest to God, that's exactly right. And I'm glad you brought up the gun issue and the stress that is affecting us all: climate, war, and healthcare, particularly the younger generation with the climate. I mean, they're seeing humanity perhaps end before they reach retirement age, for God's sake. Think of what impact that would have on healthcare. And these guns, I talk about it on my show all the time. Again, the doc wouldn't go political like this, but I tell people, there are 300 million plus guns in the hands of Americans. We have more guns than we have people. I drive around town, I see yard signs that say protect the Second Amendment. I'm like, what the hell? How is the Second Amendment under duress? I mean, there's never been anyone, to my knowledge, in this country that hasn't had an access to a gun, and look what's resulted from it. I don't know how we prioritize and look at these issues, and the fact that you would stick one yard sign in your yard where that would be the biggest issue in the world to you. I mean, we need to think about these other things. The mind-body connection is a perfect example, but think about working together to resolve some of these issues. You're not going to hate the opposition into the ground. That won't defeat them. That will not get rid of them. What the doc's talking about will, and we can work together to solve some of the issues that we can solve. Let's get to that first. Just pick some of these things that we can collaborate on and get them solved. And maybe this life expectancy needle that we're looking at will start to move in the right direction, Doc.
Yeah. I mean, you know what? Showing care and kindness and love to your neighbor, it's free.
Yeah.
Having someone over for dinner is almost free. It costs a couple dollars.
Yeah.
Just putting out into the world. So we know from quantum physics that thoughts travel infinite amounts of miles.
I love this.
And just putting out thoughts into our universe of holding the earth and holding everything on the earth in love can actually literally change what happens. And, we have to have compassion for, number one, ourselves. We have to love ourselves. And many people hate themselves because of what they're told on social media. You're not cute enough. You're not good enough. You're not smart enough. And therefore, you don't love yourself. Well, we all have to learn to love ourselves for what we are. We're all perfect human beings. There's no one that should ever define who or how you should be. But we are defined by that because of what we're told by marketers. Oh my gosh, you got to fit into this beautiful dress, or oh, you have to do this or that. So we define ourselves by social media, we define ourselves by marketing, and in many times that leads to distress because that's not who we are. And don't let anybody tell you who you should be. Every one of us knows who we should be. And that leads to a lot of distress. And that's, the suicide rate. Look at the suicide rate. Why are people killing themselves? It's sad. And we're, the whole thought thing. We have thousands upon thousands of thoughts a day. And then we take those thoughts as truths. Well, those thoughts are not truths. Those thoughts are only thoughts, and those thoughts disappear. If you really analyze it and you're good at, you start a mindfulness practice, you'll notice that thoughts only last a few seconds and then they're gone. Yet we react multiple times a day on those thoughts. And most of those thoughts are fear-based thoughts. So let's look at the Republican Party, and I'm going to get political now. Their sole basis of gathering voters is fear-based, right?
Yes.
It's, oh, you're not going to be able to have guns. And, oh, you're not going to be able to do this and not be able to do that. So you need to vote for me so I can protect those rights. It's fear-based. And so when things are fear-based, that group of people live in fear. They're afraid of someone of a different skin color, someone of a different sexual orientation, someone who doesn't think like them. And so our whole society, our system of hierarchy in our society is based on fear. I mean, why do you think the average white, lower to middle class person votes for Donald Trump? Donald Trump doesn't have their interest at heart.
Exactly.
They are afraid of losing their rung on the social hierarchy.
Yes. And it's
it's
the last rung. Yeah, that's right. They want to keep what they have. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
And so we all are a lot of this is fear. Oh, I'm afraid I'm going to lose. No, you're not. We shouldn't even have a hierarchy. Why? It's been generations, hundreds of years that we are supposed to be superior to anybody who doesn't have the same skin color as us. Well, that's just silliness. But that's what we're indoctrinated in, and that's what's in our gene. That's what's causing some of our, genetic expression. And we have to change how we think about this. And when you really think about it, really, our society is defined by the fact that you have more of one molecule than I do, meaning melanin. You have more, you're black, I'm white, therefore I'm superior because I have less of something. That makes absolutely no sense.
Yes. That's great. Honest to God, folks. We've been visiting with Dr. Andrew Nish. He's an interventional radiologist. Doc, this may be the best show that we've ever done together.
It's been an hour long. Too.
Yeah, that's the great part of it. And that's a great close. But I always like to give you the last word. Anything, do you want to end that way, or is there something else that you'd like to add here at the
end of the show?
I'm
going to add my usual. And my usual is it's disease is a state of dis-ease in ourselves. It's a state of dis-ease in society and in the world and the earth. And we each can change that by how we think about the world. So if you watch Fox News every day, you think the world is an utterly horrible place to live. But if you sat down with let's just use Jack Kornfield. He's a master of meditation and, wellness and things like that. You will change how you feel in your life. So you can live a life of abundance, and we have abundance in this country. Don't let anybody fool you otherwise. Or we can live a life of fear and anxiety. And when you live a life of fear and anxiety, you're going to have disease. It's going to express itself as a physical ailment at some point, whether it's a heart attack, whether it's cancer, whether it's Alzheimer's, whatever it might be. And so the beauty of all of this is we all have a choice, and we all can act, the golden rule, right? Treat others as you want yourself treated. And if you like to be yelled at and you like to be berated and belittled, then I guess you're fairly unique. But all of us want love, compassion, and kindness. And if you can think of that, what do I want from others in my life? I want to be treated with respect. I want to be treated with love. I want to be treated with kindness. Then it becomes really easy. You're a mirror. You just reflect that on someone else.
That's
it.
great. That's great. That it fits with my show perfectly because another one of the subtitles is House of Mirrors. Doc, I really appreciate you coming back on the show again. Now, I've been running these lower thirds, these chirons, telling folks they can check your podcast on Spotify. I know you've got several shows on there.
Yeah,
also
we've been on
Audible.
hiatus for 2 months
Yeah.
because we lost our PR person. And so I'm hoping to get that cranked up next month again.
And that's the Dish with Nish, right?
The Dish with Nish.
I love the name of it. Oh, that's great. Well, thanks again. I honest to God, I love this guy. It's Dr. Andrew Nish. He's an interventional radiologist. He is the guy. He is the mind-body connection guy. That's the way that I think about him. That's great. Doc, we'll talk again very soon.
Okay. Thanks, George, and have a great weekend.
That's great. And folks, if you like Podcasts by George, if you like shows like this and all of the information, advice, and perspective that you get from Dr. Nish and some of the other great guests that we have, please go to podcastbygeorge.com. And, you can like us on Facebook, and that'll notify you when the videos come out. On YouTube, subscribe, ring that notification bell. Leave us a comment. That would be great as well. And you'll be notified of the videos on YouTube. And then, of course, a lot of people just like to listen to the audio, particularly these long form podcasts like this one. It's an hour long. You can get those on Spotify, where you can hear the Docs podcast. You can also get them on Deezer and the iHeartRadio app. Spotify, I mentioned, iTunes. A lot of people listen to us on iTunes. But that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.